Hello, I'm Annette Young and welcome to the 51%, a show about women reshaping our world, coming up. As the far-right National Rally Party works hard to woo votes from French women in this month's parliamentary elections, feminist groups accuse it of using women's rights in order to advance their political agenda. Also to discuss what's at stake with women's rights in this French election, I'm joined by Paris-based feminist journalist Clement. And the women taking to the stage in one of Japan's ancient forms of theatre, a domain still very much dominated by men. But first, and as campaigning gets underway here in France for the upcoming parliamentary elections, the far-right National Rally is seeking to woo even more female voters. Its leader, Jordan Bardella, making a video in recent days saying how the party supports women's rights. Such claims, however, have been derided by feminists who argue the party is anything but a supporter of gender equality.
I want to address all the women of France today.
A campaign kick-off targeting female voters. The National Rally leader, Jordan Bardella, takes to social media to seek women's votes. The 28-year-old says he'd be a prime minister who would protect women from, quote, foreign criminals, introducing tougher sentences for violence against women.
The freedom between women and men, the freedom to dress as we wish, the fundamental right to control our own bodies are non-negotiable principles.
Women's safety, employment, living conditions. Bardella addressed a whole range of issues and sparked strong reactions from left-wing politicians, including Socialist Senator Laurence Rossignol.
They were against parity, against assisted reproductive technology for all women, and they're now trying to make us believe that they're not hostile to abortion, yet they constantly take part in meetings with those who've directly attacked sexual and reproductive rights.
Same response from the presidential party. Marie-Pierre Rixin, former president of the Women's Rights Delegation, says Bardella's video is a pack of lies.
Here we are in Longjumeau, in front of the women's shelter. What funding will there be tomorrow? We know that women's rights are a target for the far right, and these are the rights they attack when they are elected.
The candidate urges women to vote for emancipation instead of giving more power to a party that she associates with violence and domination.
And to talk further about the French elections, I'm joined in the studio by Australian Paris-based journalist Clement, who's also the editor of Impact, a bilingual feminist newsletter. Megan, thank you so much for your time. It seems that with the unprecedented chaos that's unfolded since Macron's decision to hold a snap election, that women's rights as a political issue has somehow got lost in the wash.
Well, it has really, and if you look at how this decision was made, if you read the excellent reporting that's been happening in Le Monde about how Macron came to this decision to kind of plunge the country into chaos as he has, this was a decision made by a core group of men, really pushing him to embrace this idea of a snap election. So you've got a core group of very privileged men gathered around the president in the Élysée Palace saying, go on, go for it. He's decided to go for it. It's been seen as a kind of like bold gamble on his part. But when we talk about gambling, I think it's really important to talk about what we're gambling with and specifically who we're gambling with. And any kind of opening of the door to the far right is opening to the door to all sorts of questions about women's rights in general, but also about women in all their multiplicities of identities, right? So Muslim women, Jewish women, trans women, gay women, all of these different types of women that we all are with all of our intersecting identities really are in play at an election that's being fought against a very far-right party.
It does seem, however, Megan, that Marine Le Pen and Jordan Bardella are doing their utmost to woo women voters to cast their ballots for their party. But if the National Rally does indeed gain control of the parliament, what does it mean for women's rights in general in this country?
I think it's pretty scary. I'm not going to hide that fact. This is, we saw in Bardella's video, when he talks about women's rights, he talks about making women feel safe on the streets. Now, we can understand this as a dog whistle towards immigrant men projecting this idea of immigrant men as a threat. But, we mustn't forget that this is a party that also targets immigrant women and the children of immigrant women and the grandchildren of immigrant women. This is a party that wanted to ban the wearing of the hijab in public. So, as I mentioned, we're not just women. We are all kind of we're a diverse group, women, and different women will be affected in different ways if we see this extreme right party coming to the fore. And even in this election campaign, the very fact of having Macron really fighting against Bardella, the terrain of the fight is happening very far on the right now. So Macron is calling the Front Populaire, the left coalition, he's calling them immigrationist. And he's also making comments about the idea of trans self-ID being grotesque. So again, as soon as we're playing on this territory of the far right, we're seeing different groups of women being kind of brought into play as political pawns in different ways. And I think it's very dangerous.
But do you think the National Rally's message, in terms of saying it supports women's rights, is actually landing with female voters?
I think we can see that it is. There used to be a real gender gap in terms of who voted for the far right and specifically for the Rassemblement National or the Front National before them, that it was mostly men and there was this gender gap. What we saw with the last election and increasingly is that gap is closing and we're seeing more women voting for far right parties. At the last election in 2022, there was a lot of work done around the image of Marine Le Pen, to make her more approachable and seem more like an every woman, and that we've seen has had an effect that comes on to today, where really almost as many women are voting for the far right as men.
Megan, is there any French political party, however, that's offering a feminist perspective when it comes to their policy platform?
Well, it's hard to say. I mean, what you can say for Macron's group of centrists in the Assemblée Nationale currently is that, Macron and his government were responsible for enshrining abortion in the Constitution, undoubtedly a feminist measure. The criticism of Macron's government is that they made women's rights a grand cause of his 2 presidencies, but there hasn't really been the kind of investment in resources that feminist groups have hoped for. The New Popular Front, which is the coalition of left parties, they've said they will accede to the demand of feminist groups and by putting in serious investment, the kind of investment that they've been asking for 7 years into women's rights. So that is you could definitely see that as a feminist measure embraced by one of the parties. But as you say, when we're having this type of election campaign, too often women's rights just get kind of left out.
And in the event of a hung parliament, and then you're going to sort of witness coalition building happening, what impact is that going to have on future legislation impacting women?
Well, I think it's going to be hard to get any legislation passed at all. So that will certainly be a factor. But if you're looking at the biggest or the second biggest group being the extreme right, I used the word dangerous before. I think it's extremely dangerous. And we are already in a context in France where we have rising anti-Semitism, rising Islamophobia, really concerning trends that are playing out and they're affecting the lives of people and affecting the lives of women more than women and girls more than anyone else. If your largest or second largest group, if the body that you're negotiating with has these extreme right roots and represents the extreme right, I think it is very, very concerning.
Megan Clement, it's been a pleasure speaking to you. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
To Japan next, where women are finally breaking into one of the nation's most masculine forms of theatre. No dates back to the 8th century, but only some 15% of those performing are actually women. Now that's starting to change, as Andrew Hillier reports.
On a stage usually dominated by men, these female cast members are shaking up one of Japan's most ancient forms of theatre. No dates back to the 8th century. Mayuko Kashiwazaki is playing the lead role in Dojoji, one of No's most well-known plays.
The world of traditional arts is one that is passed down from one generation to the next. But I entered it as an outsider. As a student, I saw No for the first time and was fascinated by the beauty and power of this Japanese art.
It's easy to recognize the theatrical style with its elaborate costumes and intricate masks, but women are underrepresented. Traditionally, it's an art form that's passed down from father to son, which means that only 15% of the 1,039 actors registered to perform are women. Mayuko's hoping to change that.
We now have not only female lead actors, but also female musicians. I wanted to create this with other female performers, which is how it all started.
Women were banned from the Japanese stage until the end of the 19th century. Now, more than a century later, they're finally breaking in.
And that's all for this edition, but in the meantime, we would love to hear from you. So do reach out with your suggestions via Facebook, Instagram or X. So until our next show, bye for now.